The sun was just beginning to dip behind the hills as I pulled my car up the narrow dirt driveway. Ahead of me, the old farmhouse stood like a forgotten relic, its paint chipped and peeling, its windows dark and empty. The house had looked charming enough in the pictures, a peaceful, isolated getaway, where I could finally escape the constant noise of the city. But standing before it now, something about it felt off. An uneasy chill crept up my spine as I took in the sight of the overgrown yard and the way the air seemed to hang still and heavy around me. I shook my head, trying to brush off the feeling. "This is exactly what you need," I reminded myself. A few days of quiet and solitude would do me good. After the stress of the last few months, this escape was supposed to be my chance to recharge and clear my head. I had been through so much long work hours, personal struggles, and a recent breakup that still left me feeling raw. I needed a break from it all. And this old farmhouse, with its promise of isolation and simplicity, seemed like the perfect place to reset. I grabbed my bags from the trunk and made my way toward the front door. The ground beneath my feet was uneven, and the gravel crunched loudly with every step, shattering the silence of the surrounding countryside. I hesitated for a moment at the door, my hand on the rusty knob. There it was again, that strange sense of unease. It felt like the house was watching me, waiting. "Stop it," I scolded myself. "It's just an old house." Pushing the door open, I stepped inside. The wooden floor groaned beneath my weight, the sound echoing through the empty rooms. The inside was even more rundown than the outside. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs clung to the corners. A faint, musty smell hung in the air, thick and sour, like the house had been sealed shut for years. I wrinkled my nose but tried to brush it off as I set my bags down. "Just needs a little cleaning," I muttered to myself, though I wasn't entirely convinced. I wandered through the rooms, taking in the antique furniture and faded wallpaper. Each room felt like a forgotten memory, old, neglected, and heavy with the weight of time. The living room held a large, weathered armchair and a wooden coffee table that looked like it might collapse if I even touched it. In the dining room, an ancient chandelier hung crooked from the ceiling, its once bright crystals now dull and caked in dust. The kitchen, with its outdated appliances and chipped countertops, was no better. Despite the house's eerie state, I tried to keep my focus on why I was here. This was supposed to be my time to relax. I had been so overwhelmed lately, and this getaway was my chance to clear my head, away from the chaos of my everyday life. But as I wandered through the house, the unsettling quietness began to gnaw at me. It wasn't just the silence that bothered me, it was the stillness. There was no hum of electricity, no creaking of old pipes, no gentle breeze blowing through the windows. It was as if the entire house was holding its breath. I shook off the feeling again, trying to focus on getting settled. It was just an old house, I told myself. Old houses had quirks, creaky floors, weird smells, and that unsettling sense of time standing still. That's what gave them character, right? As the sun disappeared completely behind the hills, casting the world in deep, purplish shadows, I found myself in the kitchen, trying to prepare a simple dinner. The housey old electric stove whined as I turned it on, and I busied myself with chopping vegetables and boiling water. The flickering light above the sink caught my eye, and I glanced up, frowning. The bulb dimmed for a moment, then flickered back to life. A second later, it flickered again, this time more violently. I felt my stomach twist with unease, and before I could react, the lights went out entirely. Darkness swallowed the kitchen, and a tight knot of fear began to coil in my chest. The sudden silence was deafening. I stood still for a moment, gripping the edge of the counter, trying to steady my breathing. "It's just the power," I reminded myself. Old houses lose power all the time. I fumbled for my phone in my back pocket, my hands trembling slightly as I turned on the flashlight. The weak beam of light cut through the darkness, just enough for me to make out the shadowy outlines of the kitchen. The house felt different now, heavier, darker, more suffocating. I decided to wait in the living room, hoping the power would come back soon. As I moved cautiously through the houses, my footsteps echoing in the quiet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to shift as I passed, and the stillness that had felt eerie before now felt downright threatening. Just as I reached the living room, a sound shattered the silence, a distant, low rumble. It was coming from outside. My heart skipped a beat, and I rushed to the window, peeking through the old, faded curtains. The gravel driveway was illuminated by the glow of headlights. A black car had pulled up in front of the house, its engine now silent. My pulse quickened. I wasn't expecting anyone. Two men stepped out of the car, their faces hidden in the shadows cast by the car's headlights. They stood still for a moment, surveying the house. My heart pounded in my chest. What were they doing here? Why hadn't they knocked? I pulled back from the window, my breath shallow. Something about their presence felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but every instinct was screaming at me to stay hidden. I ducked down behind the armchair, peeking out through the small gap between the curtains. The men didn't knock. They didn't speak. They just stood there, looking at the house in silence. One of them, taller and broader than the other, took a step forward, his foot crunching on the gravel. My heart raced. Why weren't they leaving? Who were they? I pressed myself against the back of the armchair, trying to steady my breathing. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe they were lost, or maybe they had come to the wrong house. But something told me that wasn't the case. They seemed too deliberate, too purposeful in their movements. Then I heard the sound of footsteps on the gravel. They were approaching the front door. Panic surged through me. I wasn't prepared for this. I had come here to escape, to find peace and quiet, not to be terrorized by strangers in the middle of nowhere. I held my breath, hoping they wouldn't try to come inside. Maybe they'd knock, realize no one was answering, and leave. But the dread in my gut told me otherwise. For a moment, everything was silent again. Then I heard the soft sound of knuckles against the wooden door. Knock, knock, knock. My blood ran cold. The knocking was quiet at first, almost polite, but then it grew louder, more insistent. I didn't move. I didn't dare breathe. My pulse was pounding so loudly in my ears that I was afraid they'd hear it through the door. The knocking stopped, and for a brief second, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they had given up. But then I heard the unmistakable creak of the door swinging open. They were inside. Fear took over. My body froze, and my mind raced. What could I do? I didn't have a weapon, and there was no phone signal out here in the countryside. I glanced around the room, searching for anything I could use to defend myself, but the house was practically empty. I heard their footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the front hallway. They were looking for something or someone. They were looking for me. I spotted the back door, partially hidden by an old, tattered curtain. It led to the woods behind the house. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized it was my only chance. Without thinking, I bolted for the door, my movements careful but quick. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock, and the old hinges creaked loudly as I pushed it open. I winced, terrified the noise had given me away. I slipped outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap to the face. The forest stretched out in front of me, dark and uninviting, but I didn't have time to be afraid of it. I had to run. I had to get away. I sprinted into the trees, branches scratching at my arms and legs as I plunged deeper into the woods. The ground was uneven, and I stumbled more than once, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind me, I could hear the low voices of the men, and the fear in my chest turned to full-blown panic. They were following me. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let them catch me. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, the thick canopy above blocking out what little light there was. I could barely see where I was going, but I kept running, the sound of their footsteps growing closer and closer. Finally, I spotted a large, dense bush near the edge of a steep hill. I threw myself behind it, crouching low, trying to make myself as small as possible. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure they would hear it. I listened, straining to catch their voices. "She couldn't have gone far," one of them muttered, his voice low and menacing. "Keep looking. She has to be around here," the other replied. I pressed myself into the dirt, every muscle in my body tensing. I had never been this scared in my life. If they found me, I didn't know what they would do, but I knew it wouldn't be good. Their footsteps crunched on the leaves and twigs, growing louder, closer. One of them stopped right in front of the bush. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't see me. Time seemed to stretch on forever, each second feeling like an eternity. Then, after what felt like a lifetime, I heard them turn and walk away. Their voices grew fainter, and finally, they disappeared into the distance. I waited, frozen in place, too scared to move. I counted to 100, then 200, just to be sure. When I finally dared to peek out from behind the bush, the coast was clear. I had made it. I had escaped, but I wasn't safe yet. Not by a long shot. Shakily, I crawled out from my hiding spot, every muscle in my body aching. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to keep moving. I had to get away from the house, away from the woods, away from those men. But as I stumbled through the trees, a terrifying realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had no idea where I was. The forest stretched out in every direction, dark and endless. There was no sign of the house, no sign of a road, nothing familiar. I was lost. Panic began to set in again, twisting in my chest like a knife. What if the men came back? What if they were still searching for me? I had to find a way out of here. I pushed forward, hoping to stumble across a path or a clearing, anything that would lead me to safety. But the deeper I went, the more disoriented I became. Every tree looked the same, and the shadows seemed to shift and twist around me, playing tricks on my mind. I felt like the forest itself was alive, watching me, waiting. I was alone, lost, and terrified, and I wasn't sure if I would make it out alive. I stumbled over a root, nearly falling face first into the dirt. As I caught myself, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a twig snapping behind me. I wasn't alone. I whipped around, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. My heart was racing again, the fear choking me. Was it them? Were they still following me? I didn't wait to find out. I started running again, faster this time, ignoring the burning in my legs and the sharp branches that scratched at my skin. For what felt like hours, I ran through the forest, blindly searching for a way out. The sky above me had turned a deep, inky black, and I could barely see my hand in front of my face. My lungs were screaming for air, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let them catch me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw a faint light in the distance. A road. I stumbled toward it, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. When I reached the road, I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath. but I wasn't safe yet. There were no cars, no sign of life. Just the empty road stretching out in both directions. I started walking, hoping that someone would drive by, that someone would help me. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an hour. The cold night air bit at my skin, and I could feel the exhaustion creeping in. I was so tired, so scared, but I couldn't give up. Not yet. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I heard the sound of a car approaching. My heart leapt in my chest as I saw the headlights in the distance. I waved my arms frantically, praying they would stop. The car slowed, and for a brief moment, I felt a surge of relief. But as the car pulled up beside me, my stomach dropped. It was the same black car. I froze, my mind racing. How had they found me? I didn't wait to find out. I turned and sprinted back toward the forest, but my legs were so weak. I barely made it a few feet before I stumbled. The car door opened, and I heard footsteps behind me. "Wait," a voice called out, but it wasn't the men. It was a woman's voice. I stopped, my heart pounding in my ears, and turned around. A woman stepped out of the car, followed by 2 children. They looked concerned, not threatening. "Are you okay?" she asked, taking a cautious step toward me. Relief flooded through me, and I collapsed to the ground, too exhausted to speak. The family helped me into their car, offering me water and a blanket. As they drove me to the nearest town, I couldn't stop shaking, the events of the night replaying in my mind. A few days later, I checked the website for the farmhouse. The listing was gone. I never heard from Gary again, and no one ever believed my story. Some said I was overreacting, that Gary and his friends were just trying to be friendly. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was very, very wrong with them.